The blood on Fiona Reeves' hands wouldn't wash away, no matter how hard she scrubbed. The water in the basin had long since turned pink, but still she scrubbed, the bristles of the brush leaving her skin raw in the dim light of the hotel room. Outside, the town of Eagar, Arizona Territory, slept under a blanket of stars, unaware of the woman fighting her demons in room 13 of the Wayfarer's Inn. The year was 1884, and Fiona had arrived in town just 3 days prior, with nothing but a carpet bag containing 2 dresses, a hairbrush, and enough money to last her a month if she was careful. Her auburn hair hung in limp waves around her pale face, and dark circles shadowed her green eyes. She'd been beautiful once, before life had carved its hardships into her features. A knock at her door startled her so badly she knocked over the basin, sending the pink-tinged water splashing across the wooden floorboards. "Who is it?" she called, her voice barely audible. "Madam." "Everything all right in there?" The voice was deep, concerned. "Heard some commotion." Fiona quickly mopped up the spilled water with a towel. "Yes, fine, just clumsy is all." "Silence, then." "All right, then. Good night, madam." She listened to the heavy footsteps retreating down the hallway before collapsing onto the narrow bed. Sleep would not come easily tonight, just as it hadn't for the past year. Not since Chicago, not since Thomas. As dawn broke over the mountains, Fiona dressed in her plainest dress, a brown cotton affair that had seen better days. She'd need to find work soon. The money wouldn't last, and she couldn't afford to move on again. Not yet. She needed time to disappear. The dining room of the inn was nearly empty when she descended the stairs. Only one other patron sat at a table by the window, a man in a worn leather vest and dusty hat, a cup of coffee steaming in front of him. He looked up as she entered, and Fiona quickly averted her gaze, making her way to a table as far from him as possible. "Coffee, miss?" asked the proprietress, a round woman with kind eyes. "Please. And perhaps information about employment in town." The woman poured the steaming liquid into a chipped cup. "Well, now, depends on what you're looking for. Can you sew?" Fiona nodded. "Mrs. Patterson at the dress shop might need help. Or there's the schoolhouse if you've got learning." "I was a teacher once," Fiona admitted quietly. "Well then, you should speak with Mr. Collins. Been looking for someone since Miss Abernathy ran off with that drummer back in June." The man by the window stood, leaving coins beside his empty cup. As he passed Fiona's table, he tipped his hat. "Madam." His eyes, she noticed with a jolt, were the color of a summer sky. For a moment she found herself unable to look away. "Madam," he repeated, a slight smile on his weathered face. "Good morning," she managed, dropping her gaze to her coffee. When she looked up again, he was gone, but somehow the room felt emptier for his absence. The school in Eagar was a single-room building at the edge of town, painted white but peeling badly. A dozen or so desks faced a larger one at the front of the room, where a harried-looking man was attempting to maintain order among children of varying ages. "Mr. Collins," Fiona called from the doorway. The man looked up, relief washing over his features. "One moment, please." He turned to the children. "Continue with your sums. Thomas, you're in charge until I return." A boy of about 12 nodded solemnly, immediately taking his responsibility seriously. Outside, Mr. Collins wiped his brow. "You must be an angel sent from above. Please tell me you're here about the teaching position." Fiona couldn't help but smile slightly. "I am. I taught for 3 years in Chicago." "Wonderful. When can you start? Don't you want references?" He glanced back at the schoolhouse. "Can you read right and manage not to strangle the Wilson twins? If so, you're hired." And just like that, Fiona Reeves became the schoolteacher of Eagar. The work was demanding but gratifying. For hours each day, She could forget her past and focus only on spelling, arithmetic, and keeping young William Wilson from pulling his sister's braids. The townsfolk were friendly enough, though she kept to herself, taking her meals at the inn and spending her evenings alone in her room. It was nearly a week before she saw the blue-eyed man again. She was walking back from the schoolhouse, arms laden with papers to grade, when a horse and rider nearly bowled her over, sending the papers flying in a cloud of dust. Whoa there! The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, coming to her aid. "I apologize, madam. Didn't see you with the sun in my eyes." It was him, the man from the inn. Up close, she could see that his face bore the lines of a man who spent his days under the harsh western sun. His hands were calloused but gentle as he helped gather her scattered papers. "Thank you," she said, accepting the stack he'd collected. "No harm done. You're the new school teacher." It wasn't a question. "Yes, and you are," he extended his hand. "Hayden Calloway, I ranch north of town." She hesitated before taking his hand briefly. "Fiona Reeves, Miss Reeves," he nodded. "Welcome to Eagar, though I reckon I'm a bit late with that greeting." "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only when his horse snorted impatiently. "Well," he said, mounting again, "I should let you get on with your evening." "Yes, of course." He tipped his hat once more and rode on, leaving Fiona standing in the middle of the dusty street, papers clutched to her chest, wondering why her heart was beating so rapidly. That night the dreams came again. Blood on her hands, Thomas's face twisted in surprise, the sound of the gun. She woke with a gasp, sheets tangled around her legs, her nightdress damp with sweat. Dawn was still hours away, but sleep had fled. She rose, lighting a lamp, and moved to the small desk where she'd been grading papers. Work would distract her, keep the memories at bay until exhaustion claimed her again. By the time the first light of morning touched the eastern sky, Fiona had graded all the arithmetic tests and was working on the history essays. Her eyes burned from strain and lack of sleep, but it was better than the alternative. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Fiona taught during the day, took her meals alone, and battled her demons at night. If the townspeople noticed the shadows under her eyes deepening, they were too polite to mention it. She saw Hayden Calloway occasionally, usually from a distance as he conducted business in town. Once, their eyes met across the dusty main street and he raised his hand in greeting. She nodded back, ignoring the strange flutter in her chest. It was foolish, this reaction to a man she barely knew, dangerous even. She couldn't afford connections, couldn't risk anyone looking too closely at her past. She had built a fragile peace in Eagar, and she intended to preserve it. But fate had other plans. The storm blew in without warning on a Friday afternoon. One moment, the sky was clear. The next, dark clouds rolled in from the west, bringing with them a deluge that turned the streets to rivers of mud. Fiona dismissed her students early, watching anxiously as they splashed their way home through the downpour. "You shouldn't try to make it back to the inn in this," said Thomas Wilson, the eldest student at 14. "My pa's shop is just down the street. You could wait there until it lets up." Fiona hesitated, but a crack of thunder decided for her. "Lead the way, Thomas." Wilson's general store was warm and dry, smelling of coffee, leather, and tobacco. Mr. Wilson, a burly man with a bushy mustache, welcomed her with genuine hospitality. "Terrible day to be out, Miss Reeves. Help yourself to some coffee. Pot's fresh." As she sipped the strong brew, the bell over the door jangled and Hayden Calloway stepped in, water streaming from his hat and coat. "Afternoon, Hank," he said to Wilson, then noticed Fiona. "Miss Reeves." "Mr. Calloway," she replied, nodding politely, caught in the storm. He asked, removing his dripping hat. Yes, I was fortunate that Thomas offered shelter. Hayden hung his coat on a peg near the door. It's a bad one, creeks rising fast, might wash out the bridge to the north if it keeps up. That's your way home, isn't it? Asked Wilson. Hayden nodded grimly. I was hoping to get back before it got too high, but from the looks of things. He glanced out the window at the sheets of rain. You're welcome to wait it out here, Wilson offered, but if the bridge goes, you might be stuck in town for a day or two. I appreciate that, Hank. For the next hour, they listened to the storm rage outside while Wilson tended to occasional customers. Fiona graded papers she'd brought with her, acutely aware of Hayden Calloway's presence across the room. He'd taken up a seat near the stove, occasionally exchanging words with Wilson but mostly gazing thoughtfully into the flames. As evening approached, it became clear the storm wasn't abating. "Bridge is gone," announced a drenched ranch hand who'd come in for supplies. "Saw it wash out myself not 20 minutes ago," Hayden sighed. "Figured as much. Guess I'm staying in town tonight." "Inn's probably full up with folks stranded by the storm," Wilson commented. "I'll find somewhere," Hayden said, rising and reaching for his still damp coat. Wilson looked out at the darkness. "Miss Reeves, you should probably head back to the inn before it gets any later. Not safe for a lady to be out alone after dark, storm or no." Hayden immediately stepped forward. "I'd be happy to escort you, madam." Fiona wanted to refuse, to insist she was perfectly capable of walking the short distance alone, but something in Wilson's expression told her it would be useless to protest. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the streets were treacherous with mud. Hayden offered his arm, which Fiona reluctantly took, her hand resting lightly on the rough fabric of his coat. "Been enjoying your time in Eagar?" he asked as they navigated around a particularly deep puddle. "Yes," she replied simply, offering nothing more. "The children seem to like you." "Heard the Wilson twins actually behave in your class, which is something of a miracle." Despite herself, she smiled slightly. "They're good children, just spirited. That's a charitable way of putting it." There was humor in his voice, warm and genuine. They reached the inn too quickly. At the door, Fiona withdrew her hand from his arm. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Calloway." "My pleasure, Miss Reeves." He hesitated, then added, "I hope you'll join me for supper, unless you've other plans." She should refuse. Every instinct told her to retreat to the safety of solitude. But something in his eyes' kindness without expectation made her hesitate. Yes, thank you." The dining room was busier than usual, filled with travelers stranded by the storm. They managed to secure a small table in the corner, where they were served a simple but hearty meal of beef stew and fresh bread. Hayden proved to be surprisingly easy to talk to. He spoke of his ranch, the challenges of raising cattle in the territory, the beauty of the land after spring rains. He asked about her teaching, seemed genuinely interested in her methods and the progress of her students. Carefully, she steered the conversation away from her past, offering vague answers when he inquired about Chicago. If he noticed her reticence, he didn't press. As they finished their meal, a commotion at the front of the inn drew their attention. A man in a dripping coat was speaking urgently to the proprietress, who nodded and hurried away. "What's happening?" Fiona asked. "Don't know," Hayden replied, standing to get a better view. The proprietress returned with several men, including the town doctor. They hurried out into the night, leaving curious murmurs in their wake. Hayden stopped a passing server. "What's going on?" "Wagon accident out on the East Road," the young man replied. "Family trapped in the creek." "They're gathering men to help." Without hesitation, Hayden grabbed his coat. "Excuse me, Miss Reeves. I should go." Fiona nodded, watching as he joined the group of men heading out into the stormy night. An odd feeling settled in her chest, concern for a man she barely knew. She retired to her room, but sleep eluded her. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes, and she found herself wondering if Hayden was safe, if the stranded family had been rescued. It was near midnight when she heard the men returning, voices low in the inn's lobby. Unable to resist, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and crept to her door, opening it just enough to peer out. Hayden was there, soaked to the skin and covered in mud, but alive. As if sensing her presence, he looked up, their eyes meeting across the dim hallway. He gave her a tired smile and a small nod before heading to his own room. Fiona returned to her bed, strangely comforted, and for once, her sleep was dreamless. Morning brought clear skies and the aftermath of the storm's destruction. Fences were down, roads washed out, and debris scattered throughout the town. Classes were canceled for the day, and everyone who was able joined in the cleanup efforts. Fiona found herself working alongside several townswomen, clearing branches from the schoolyard. Hayden was nowhere to be seen, likely having returned to his ranch now that the bridge was passable again. She told herself the pang of disappointment she felt was merely surprise at his departure without a farewell. Nothing more. As the day wore on, rumors spread about the family caught in the flood. The father had perished, they said, but the mother and children had been saved, thanks largely to the efforts of Hayden Calloway, who'd risked his own life to reach them. Fiona listened to these accounts with growing admiration. The man she'd shared supper with had shown courage few possessed. It made her own secrets seem heavier somehow. It was late afternoon when she finally returned to the inn, exhausted from the day's labor. To her surprise, Hayden was in the lobby, deep in conversation with the sheriff. They broke off as she entered, and Hayden turned to her with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Reeves," he greeted her. "Good to see you well. And you, Mr. Calloway." She glanced between the two men. "Is everything all right?" The sheriff, a grizzled man named Parker, touched the brim of his hat. "Just discussing some business, madam. Nothing to concern yourself with." But something in Hayden's expression told her otherwise. As the sheriff departed, Hayden turned to her. "Would you join me for a walk, Miss Reeves? If you're not too tired from the day's work." Curiosity overrode caution. "Of course." They strolled in silence for a time, past the battered storefronts being repaired and the muddy streets slowly drying in the late afternoon sun. Finally, at the edge of town, Hayden stopped. "I wanted to thank you for your company last night," he said. "It was unexpected but pleasant." "You're welcome," she replied, unsure of his direction. "I enjoyed it as well." He studied her face as if searching for something. "You're running from something, aren't you?" The question hit her like a physical blow. "I don't know what you mean," she managed, her voice barely steady. "I recognize it because I've seen it before, in my own mirror years ago." His voice was gentle, not accusing. "You don't have to tell me what it is. I just want you to know. Eagar's a good place for fresh starts." The kindness in his eyes nearly undid her. For a moment, she considered telling him everything about Thomas, about the blood, about the nightmares. Instead, she looked away. "Thank you, Mr. Calloway." "Hayden," he said, "please." "Hayden," she echoed softly. They walked back to the inn in companionable silence. The air between them changed somehow. At the door, he tipped his hat. "Good evening, Fiona." "Good evening, Hayden." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, and felt something stir within her that she had thought long dead. The weeks that followed brought changes to Fiona's life in Eagar. She began accepting occasional dinner invitations from other teachers and townswomen. She volunteered at the church's Sunday school. Slowly, cautiously, she allowed herself to become part of the community. And then there was Hayden. He found reasons to be in town more often, frequently stopping by the schoolhouse at day's end to walk her back to the inn. They spoke of books, of music, of the changing seasons, never of the past, his or hers. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came Eagar's Founders' Day celebration, a day-long affair of food, music, and dancing in the town square. "You'll come, won't you?" Hayden asked as they shared a pot of tea on the inn's veranda one evening. "The whole town will be there." Fiona hesitated. Such a public gathering meant attention, something she still instinctively avoided. "I don't know." "Please," he said, covering her hand with his own. It was the first time he'd touched her since that stormy night, and the warmth of his skin against hers sent an unexpected thrill through her. It wouldn't be the same without you. How could she refuse him when he looked at her that way? All right. The day of the celebration dawned bright and clear. Fiona wore her best dress, a blue cotton that matched her eyes, and even took extra care with her hair, pinning it up with a silver comb she'd managed to keep through all her travels. The town square was transformed, decorated with bunting and lanterns. Tables groaned under the weight of food brought by every family in the area. A band played lively tunes while children darted about, their laughter mingling with the music. Hayden found her almost immediately, looking more handsome than she'd ever seen him in a clean shirt and vest, his usual worn hat replaced by a newer one. "You look beautiful," he said simply. She blushed, unaccustomed to compliments. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." The day passed in a blur of food, conversation, and laughter. Fiona found herself genuinely enjoying the company of the townspeople, many of whom she now considered friends. As evening fell, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the square as the band struck up a waltz. "May I have this dance?" Hayden asked, extending his hand. Fiona hadn't danced since. She couldn't remember when. But tonight, with stars appearing overhead and the man before her looking at her as if she were the only woman in the world, she found herself nodding. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, guiding her through the steps with surprising grace for a man who spent his days on horseback. They moved together as if they'd danced 100 times before, her hand in his blue eyes never leaving hers. "I never expected to find someone like you in Eagar," he said quietly as they turned beneath the lantern light. "Someone like me. Someone who makes me want to be a better man. Someone who sees the good in others, even when they can't see it themselves." His words touched something deep within her, something she tried to bury along with her past. "You don't know me," she whispered. "Not really." "I know enough," he replied. "I know you're kind to children who test your patience daily. I know you help Mrs. Patterson with her sewing when her arthritis pains her, though you never mention it. I know your smile can light up a room, rare as it is." The music ended, but they remained standing close, his hand still at her waist. Around them, couples separated, applauding the band, but they were in a world of their own. "Hayden," she began, not knowing what she wanted to say. A commotion at the edge of the square interrupted her. Voices were raised, one in particular carrying over the crowd Sheriff Parker's. "That's enough, Danner, you're drunk, go sleep it off." "Don't tell me what to do, Parker," came the slurred reply. "I got rights same as anybody." Hayden tensed, his expression darkening. "Excuse me," he said to Fiona. "I should help." She watched as he made his way through the crowd toward the disturbance. At the edge of the square, she could see Sheriff Parker confronting a disheveled man with a week's growth of beard, swaying on his feet. Several other men, including Hayden, formed a loose circle around them. Words were exchanged, too low for Fiona to hear. Then suddenly the drunk man lunged, something glinting in his hand. There was a shout, a scuffle, and then the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. The crowd scattered, women screaming, children crying. Fiona stood frozen, the sound of the shot echoing in her memory. overlaid with another from a year ago in a Chicago apartment. Through the chaos, she saw Hayden kneeling beside a fallen figure, not the drunk, but Sheriff Parker. Blood stained the front of the sheriff's shirt, spreading rapidly. Without thinking, Fiona rushed forward, pushing through the dispersing crowd. She fell to her knees beside Hayden, who was pressing a wadded bandana against the wound. "Hold this," he instructed, and she complied automatically, her hands once again covered in another man's blood. The doctor arrived moments later, taking charge of the situation. Together with several men, they carried the sheriff to his office, which doubled as a surgery when needed. Hayden insisted Fiona return to the inn, but she refused, following them instead. "I can help," she said firmly. "I've had experience with injuries." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Fiona assisted the doctor as he worked to remove the bullet lodged near the sheriff's collarbone. Hayden remained as well, fetching water, holding lamps, doing whatever was needed. It was past midnight when the doctor finally pronounced Parker stable. "He'll live, thanks to your quick action," he told them. "Both of you." Outside the doctor's office, the night was quiet, the celebration long since ended. Fiona's blue dress was stained with blood, her hands raw from scrubbing them clean in lye soap. "I'll walk you back," Hayden said, his voice weary. They were halfway to the inn when Fiona stopped suddenly. "I can't do this." Hayden turned to her, concern etching his features. "Do what? Pretend?" Her voice broke on the word. "Pretend that I'm the person you think I am, that I deserve your kindness, your attention." "Fiona, no, please." She held up a hand to stop him. "You need to know before this goes any further." He studied her face in the moonlight, then nodded once. "All right." She led him to a bench outside the darkened milliner's shop where they sat side by side, not touching. For a long moment she couldn't speak, the words stuck in her throat. "I killed a man," she finally whispered. "In Chicago, a year ago. If he was shocked, he didn't show it." He waited silent for her to continue. "His name was Thomas Blackwell. We were engaged." The memories came flooding back, as vivid as if they'd happened yesterday. "He was charming, handsome, the son of a banker. Everyone thought I was so lucky." She twisted her hands in her lap. "But he had another side, a cruel one. At first it was just words, criticism. Then he began to control everything, what I wore, who I spoke to. When I tried to leave him, Her voice faltered. "He hurt you," Hayden supplied quietly. Fiona nodded. "The first time he apologized. Swore it would never happen again. I believed him. The second time he blamed me, said I provoked him. The third time, I stopped counting after that." She took a shaky breath. "The night it happened, he'd been drinking. He was angrier than I'd ever seen him, he said. Horrible things. He had a gun. He waved it around, said he'd rather see me dead than leave him." The next part was hardest to tell. "We struggled. The gun went off. He died instantly." Silence fell between them, heavy with her confession. Fiona couldn't bear to look at Hayden, certain she would see disgust or fear in his eyes. "It was self-defense," he said finally. "That's what the police said too. But his family, they had influence. They made sure everyone knew their version, that I was unstable, that I'd murdered their son in a fit of jealousy. No one would hire me. Neighbors who'd been friends for years crossed the street to avoid me." The bitterness of those days still tasted sharp on her tongue. "So I left, traveled west, changed my name slightly, started over. And the nightmares began," he guessed. She looked at him then, surprised. "How did you know?" "I've seen you walking the halls at night sometimes, heard you cry out once or twice." His expression was troubled. "I wanted to help, but I'm a murderer," she finished for him. "No." His voice was firm. "You're a survivor. You did what you had to do to stay alive." Tears welled in her eyes. "They say I deserve the pain for my sins," she whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep inside her. The nightmares, the fear, the loneliness. It's my punishment. Hayden reached for her then, taking her hands in his. You deserve only joy, he said, his blue eyes fierce with conviction. Only joy, Fiona, not pain. Never pain. And in that moment, as the words washed over her like a benediction, something inside her broke open. She wept, truly wept for the first time since Thomas's death. For the woman she'd been, for the life she'd lost, for the guilt she'd carried like a stone around her neck. Hayden held her through it all, his strong arms a shelter she hadn't known she needed. When the storm of emotions finally passed, she felt lighter somehow, as if in sharing her burden it had diminished. I should go, she said at last, pulling away slightly. It's late, Fiona. His voice stopped her. Thank you for trusting me. She met his gaze, saw nothing there but warmth and understanding. Thank you for listening, for not judging. We all have pasts, he said simply. What matters is who we choose to be now. As she lay in bed that night, Fiona replayed his words in her mind. You deserve only joy. Could it be true? Could she let go of the guilt, the fear, the constant looking over her shoulder? For the first time in a year, she dared to hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a new day in more ways than one. Fiona rose feeling rested, the burden of her secret shared and somehow lighter for it. At breakfast, Hayden was waiting for her, his face serious but his eyes warm. Good morning, he greeted her. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in a long time, she admitted. I'm glad. He hesitated, then continued. I have to ride out to the ranch today, check on things, but I was hoping. That is, would you consider joining me for a picnic tomorrow? There's a place I'd like to show you. The invitation surprised her. After her revelation, she'd half expected him to distance himself, to reconsider whatever feelings he might have had for her. I'd like that, she said softly. His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. I'll come for you around noon. The day passed in a blur of teaching and preparations. Fiona found herself looking forward to the outing with an anticipation that was both exciting and terrifying. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to feel such things. True to his word, Hayden arrived at noon the next day, driving a small buggy rather than riding his usual horse. He helped her up with a gentle hand, their fingers lingering together a moment longer than necessary. They drove east out of town, following a winding track that led up into the foothills. The landscape was breathtaking, rolling hills giving way to pine-covered mountains, wildflowers dotting the meadows in splashes of yellow and purple. It's beautiful, Fiona breathed, taking in the vista. This is my favorite place in all of Arizona Territory, Hayden said, guiding the horse off the track and into a small clearing surrounded by aspen trees. I found it my first year here, when I was still trying to decide if I'd made a mistake buying the ranch. He helped her down from the buggy, then retrieved a basket from the back. They spread a blanket beneath the largest aspen, whose leaves danced in the slight breeze, casting dappled shadows across the ground. The meal was simple but delicious: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and ripe peaches. They ate and talked, more freely now that there were no secrets between them. Hayden told her of his childhood in Missouri, his decision to come west after the war, his struggles to establish the ranch. It was hard at first, he admitted. There were times I nearly gave up, but this place. He gestured to the surrounding landscape. It gets under your skin, becomes part of you. I can see why you love it, Fiona said, gazing out at the rolling hills. After they'd eaten, they walked along a small stream that cut through the clearing, the water clear and cold from the mountain snowmelt. Fish darted in the pools, silver flashes in the sunlight. Fiona. Hayden's voice was serious suddenly. He took her hand, turning her to face him. I need to tell you something, her heart quickened. Yes, When you told me about your past, about Thomas, I understood more than you might think." She waited, sensing there was more. "I killed men too, during the war." His eyes clouded with memories. "I was young, barely 18. Thought I was fighting for a grand cause. Instead, I found only death and suffering." He released her hand, turning to gaze at the stream. "For years afterward I had nightmares, saw their faces, heard their cries, wondered if I deserved to live when they hadn't." "What changed?" she asked softly. "Time. Distance. And eventually I realized that living in guilt wasn't honoring their memory or mine, that the best thing I could do was to live a good life, to create rather than destroy." He turned back to her, his blue eyes intense. "What I'm trying to say is, I understand the weight you carry, and I know that healing isn't simple or quick, but it is possible, Fiona. I promise you that." Something in his words, in the honesty of his expression, reached deep inside her. Without thinking, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them. Her hand rose to touch his face, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of his stubble. "Hayden," she whispered, not knowing what else to say. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't want to. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she wanted to be close to someone, to feel something other than fear and guilt. Their lips met, a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened as she responded. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and she felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the summer sun. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Hayden rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first time I saw you in the dining room," he confessed. Fiona laughed softly. "Even though I could barely look at you, especially then, you were a mystery I wanted to solve. And now," she pulled back slightly to see his face, "now that you know the truth." His expression grew serious. "Now I want to know everything else. Your favorite color, how you take your tea, what makes you laugh. I want to know you, Fiona Reeves, all of you." The sincerity in his voice brought tears to her eyes. "I'd like that too," she whispered. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the clearing, talking, occasionally lapsing into comfortable silences, sharing more kisses that grew increasingly confident. By the time they packed up to return to town, something had shifted between them, a connection forged that neither had expected but both embraced. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Hayden was a frequent visitor to the schoolhouse, often bringing small gifts, a book he thought she'd enjoy. Wildflowers gathered on his ride into town, once even a kitten he'd rescued from a hollow log, which Fiona promptly named Aspen in honor of their special clearing. They shared suppers at the inn, walks along the creek, and occasional rides to his ranch, where he proudly showed her the improvements he was making: a new barn, expanded corrals, a vegetable garden begun with an eye to the future. Through it all, Fiona found herself opening up, rediscovering parts of herself she'd thought lost forever. She laughed more. The nightmares, while not gone completely, came less frequently. She began to see herself not as a fugitive but as a woman building a new life. And always, there was Hayden, patient and steady, never pushing but always present. He seemed to understand instinctively when she needed space and when she needed closeness. It was on a crisp October evening, as they sat on the inn's veranda watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, that he took her hand and said simply, "Marry me." Fiona's heart skipped a beat. "Hayden, before you answer," he interrupted gently, "I want you to know something. I'm not asking because I think you need saving or protecting. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Fiona. I'm asking because I love you, because my life is better with you in it. Because I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you by my side." Tears blurred her vision as she looked at this man who had come to mean everything to her. "Are you sure my past is part of what made you who you are, and I love who you are?" He squeezed her hand. "I'm not afraid of your past, Fiona. I'm only concerned with our future." In that moment, looking into his earnest blue eyes, Fiona made a decision to trust, to hope, to believe that perhaps she did deserve joy after all. "Yes," she whispered, her voice gaining strength as she repeated, "Yes, I'll marry you." The smile that lit his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that spoke volumes of his feelings. When they parted, he reached into his pocket and produced a small silver ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart." Fiona stared at the ring, this tangible symbol of a future she'd never dared to imagine. "It's beautiful," she murmured, then looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "I love you, Hayden." It was the first time she'd said the words aloud, though they'd been growing in her heart for months. His response was to draw her into his arms again, holding her as if he never intended to let go. News of their engagement spread quickly through the small town. To Fiona's surprise and gratitude, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Her students were especially delighted, the girls sighing romantically and the boys teasing but good-natured. "Will you still be our teacher after you're married, Miss Reeves?" asked little Sarah Wilson during arithmetic one morning. Fiona smiled. "For a while, yes. But eventually, I'll be living at Mr. Calloway's ranch, which is a bit far for daily travel." "Then you should teach at the ranch," declared Thomas Wilson, Sarah's older brother. "Pa says there are at least a dozen children at the outlying ranches who can't come to town for schooling." The idea took root in Fiona's mind, growing as she discussed it with Hayden that evening. "It could work," he said thoughtfully. "The old bunkhouse could be converted into a schoolroom. We'd need to hire someone to help at the main school in town, of course. You wouldn't mind having children at the ranch during the day," he smiled, taking her hand. "I'm hoping to have children at the ranch all the time eventually. Ours." The thought of their children, sent a warm thrill through Fiona. A family of her own, something she'd once thought forever beyond her reach. They planned a December wedding, simple but meaningful. Fiona wrote to her sister in Boston, her only remaining family, who responded with surprised delight and a promise to attend. Hayden's brother and his family would come from Missouri. As the day approached, Fiona found herself increasingly at peace. The nightmares had all but ceased, and when they did come, Hayden's words echoed in her mind. "You deserve only joy." The evening before the wedding, as they walked along the creek that ran behind the church, Fiona stopped suddenly. "I need to tell you something." Hayden turned to her, concern in his eyes. "What is it?" "I'm not afraid anymore," she said simply. "For so long, fear has been my constant companion. Fear of being found out, fear of getting close to anyone, fear of my own memories." She took his hands in hers. "But now, when I think of tomorrow, of our future together, all I feel is happiness, hope." His eyes softened with understanding and love. "That's the greatest gift you could give me, Fiona, to know that you feel safe with me, with us." "I do," she smiled up at him. "For the first time since everything happened, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm meant to be." He kissed her then, a promise of all the tomorrows to come. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the first snowfall of the year dusting the mountains in the distance. Fiona dressed in the small room at the back of the church, assisted by her sister Catherine, who had arrived 2 days before. "You look beautiful," Catherine said, adjusting the simple veil. "And happy. I was worried when I got your letter, but now that I've met Hayden—" "He's a good man," Fiona said softly, The best I've ever known. Then I'm glad you found each other. Catherine squeezed her hand. You deserve this happiness, Fiona, after everything. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Standing before the minister, with the townspeople who had become her friends looking on, Fiona spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice. Hayden's eyes never left hers, his own vows spoken with quiet conviction. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister declared, and a cheer went up from the assembled guests. The celebration continued at the town hall, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons for the occasion. There was food and music, dancing and laughter, a joyous sending off for the couple who had found love in unlikely circumstances. As evening fell, they departed for the ranch, which would be their home from this day forward. Snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes that caught in Fiona's hair and on her eyelashes as Hayden helped her from the buggy. "Welcome home, Mrs. Calloway," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Inside, the house was warm and welcoming, a fire blazing in the hearth. Hayden had spent weeks preparing it for her arrival, adding curtains to the windows, new rugs on the floors, bookshelves filled with volumes he knew she would enjoy. "It's perfect," she whispered, taking in the cozy space that would be their sanctuary. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Hayden's arms around her, Fiona felt a peace she had never known before. The past was still there, it always would be, but it no longer defined her. She was more than the sum of her pain, more than the mistakes and tragedies that had led her to this place. She was Fiona Calloway now, wife, teacher, and soon, perhaps, mother. She was loved, not in spite of her flaws and scars, but because of the strength they represented. "What are you thinking?" Hayden murmured, his breath warm against her hair. She turned in his arms to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "That I'm grateful for everything that brought me to you, even the painful parts." His hand came up to cradle her face. "I used to wonder why I stayed in Eagar when so many of my friends moved on to bigger opportunities. Now I know. I was waiting for you, even if I didn't realize it." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "You were right," she whispered against his lips. "About what, Joy? I do deserve it, we both do." His arms tightened around her. "Yes," he agreed, "we do." As winter gave way to spring, Fiona and Hayden settled into the rhythm of married life. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts, Hayden managing the cattle and land, Fiona establishing her small school for the neighboring ranch children. 3 days a week, a half-dozen children arrived on horseback or in wagons, eager for the learning Fiona provided. They studied in the converted bunkhouse, which she had transformed with colorful maps, bookshelves, and a large blackboard Hayden had ordered specially from Phoenix. On the other days, she rode into town to assist at the main school, unwilling to completely abandon her first students. It was a busy life, but a fulfilling one. In late April, as wildflowers began to carpet the meadows around the ranch, Fiona made a discovery that filled her with both joy and trepidation. She waited until evening, when they sat together on the porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. "Hayden," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I'm going to have a baby." He turned to her, his expression shifting from surprise to wonder to pure delight. "A baby," he repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. "Our baby," she nodded, smiling through sudden tears. "In November, I think." He pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that belied his strength. "Fiona," he whispered against her hair. "My love, thank you," she laughed softly. "I hardly did it alone. You know what I mean." He drew back to look into her eyes. "Thank you for this life, for our family." As her pregnancy progressed, Fiona found herself reflecting often on the journey that had brought her to this point. How close she had come to letting fear and guilt define her existence. How differently her life might have unfolded if she hadn't found the courage to start anew in Eagar, if Hayden hadn't seen past her defenses to the woman beneath. The nightmares returned occasionally, especially as her condition made sleep more elusive. But now, when she woke gasping from dreams of blood and gunshots, Hayden was there, his steady presence anchoring her to the present, to the life they were building together. "You're safe," he would murmur, holding her close. "You're loved, and you deserve all the happiness in the world." And gradually, she came to believe it, not just as words he offered in comfort, but as a truth she felt in her bones. The baby arrived on a cold November night, a son they named William Thomas Calloway, William for Hayden's father, Thomas not for her former fiancé, but for the student whose kindness had sheltered her during the storm that had ultimately brought her and Hayden together. Holding her son for the first time, Fiona was overcome with a love so fierce it took her breath away. This tiny being, perfect and new, represented everything she had once thought beyond her reach: family, belonging, a future untainted by the past. "He has your eyes," Hayden said, wonder in his voice as he gazed down at his son. "And your chin," Fiona replied, tracing the small dimple with a gentle finger. As William grew from infant to toddler, the ranch grew as well. Hayden expanded his cattle operation, hired more hands, added rooms to the house. Fiona's school gained a reputation for excellence, drawing children from farther afield, necessitating the construction of a proper schoolhouse on the ranch property. Life was not without challenges. There were difficult seasons, drought years that stressed the cattle, a particularly harsh winter that left them snowbound for weeks, a fever that swept through the community, touching their household but sparing them the worst. Through it all, Fiona and Hayden faced each obstacle together, their bond strengthening with each trial overcome. And always, there was joy in their growing family, in the community they helped build, in the quiet moments they shared at day's end. When William was 3, a daughter joined their family, Catherine Rose, named for Fiona's sister and Hayden's mother. She was a spirited child from the beginning, with her father's blue eyes and a determination that both exhausted and delighted her parents. "She reminds me of you," Hayden told Fiona one evening as they watched their daughter stubbornly attempting to climb onto her pony without assistance. "Me," Fiona laughed. "I was never so headstrong, not outwardly perhaps, but inside," he smiled, wrapping an arm around her waist. "You're the strongest person I know, Fiona Calloway. Our daughter comes by it honestly." As the children grew, so did the legacy Fiona and Hayden were building. The ranch became known not only for its fine cattle, but also for its hospitality, and the education offered at what came to be called Calloway School. Fiona never forgot where she had come from, the circumstances that had driven her west. But as the years passed, those memories became less a source of pain and more a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit, her spirit. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayden surprised her with a gift, the deed to a piece of land adjoining their property, which included the clearing with the aspen grove where they had shared their first kiss. "I wanted to make sure it was always ours," he explained as they rode out to see it. "A place our children and their children can come to find peace, just as we did." Standing in the clearing, now familiar from countless visits over the years, Fiona turned to the man who had helped her find her way back to herself. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" "After I told you about my past," Hayden nodded, taking her hands in his. "You deserve only joy," he quoted softly. "I didn't believe you then," she admitted. "Couldn't believe you, but you were right. Of course I was." His eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. "I'm always right." She laughed, the sound echoing among the aspen trees. "Hardly always, but about this." "Yes." She stepped closer, resting her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you for showing me what joy could be." His arms encircled her, as strong and sure as they had been a decade before. "Thank you for being brave enough to accept it." As they rode back to the ranch, where their children waited, where the life they had built together continued to flourish, Fiona reflected on the long journey from that frightened woman scrubbing blood from her hands in a dingy hotel room to the person she was now: wife, mother, teacher, beloved member of a community. The pain of her past had not vanished entirely. There were still moments when memory ambushed her, still occasional nights when she woke trembling from dreams of what had been. But those moments no longer defined her. They were merely threads in the rich tapestry of a life well lived, a life filled with purpose and, yes, with joy. That evening, as their family gathered around the dinner table, Hayden at the head, William and Catherine chattering about their day's adventures, the newest addition to their family, 3-year-old James, attempting to feed carrots to the dog under the table, Fiona looked around and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. For the twist of fate that had brought her to Eagar, for the storm that had thrown her and Hayden together, for his wisdom and patience in helping her heal, for the strength she had found within herself to embrace this second chance. "What are you thinking, love?" Hayden asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Fiona smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "That you were right all those years ago. I deserved joy. We all do." His fingers tightened around hers, his blue eyes reflecting the love that had sustained them through a decade of shared life. "And joy is what we have," he said simply. Looking at their children's faces, at the home they had created together, at the man who had shown her the way back to herself, Fiona Calloway knew it was true. They had joy in abundance, a gift more precious than she could ever have imagined on that long-ago day when she had stepped off the stage in a dusty frontier town, seeking only escape. Instead, she had found her destiny,